Welcome to the Unhinged AI podcast, brought to you by Founding.dev.
And we're starting. Hey everyone, my name is Talha. I am the founder of Founding.dev. We help companies replace expensive SaaS subscriptions with their own tools. Today with me is George. George is the founder of Zentrik, which is the product operating system. By the way, I was going through your website and your LinkedIn page, George, and it says that you take in all the signals from Jira and all these different places, and then you let engineering or the product team knows what to build, what is defensible, and what customers are thinking. So I found it interesting. Like this is a good direction to be in. So would love to know more about yourself. Would be great if you can introduce yourself, and would love to know more about Zentrik as well.
Of course, Talha. Well, I'm Jorge, as you can see here on the bottom. I'm originally a Spaniard. I came to the US about 14 years ago, and all of that time I've spent working on AI. Back in the day, we used to bring chatbots and semantic search to enterprises all over the world, then worked on self-evolving chatbots, had a services company for a while, and then through the rise of GPT, we started to realize how commoditized software development was going to become, and how important it was going to be to actually help decide where to put your effort and tokens, what to actually do to solve a problem for a user. I do consider that product management. I do think that every engineer should start to get, if they don't already have it, a good product sense to understand how their software creates value, because code by itself has zero value. Code becomes software, which has a function, and software can become a product, which actually solves a problem. And so what we do is particularly help companies do that, do product, continuously prioritizing based on the signals that we're getting from the market, be that public sources or those first-party data that you mentioned. Particularly the most interesting ones for us are usually the sales signal. So understanding the conversations that are happening from salespeople to customers, customer success, as well as their own interviews and ticketing systems, to actually pull it all together to tell you that this particular idea could have this much impact on your pipeline, or this other particular idea affects 40% of your account base, without you having to dig for that data or have Claude do that.
Okay, I have to ask you, are you replacing product managers? Because, I mean, this is like one of the things that product managers or project managers do, like, take signals in and create requirements out of that, or a direction out of that. So what is your take on, like, is it replacing people, or is it just augmenting?
It's more of a... It's more of a complicated question than it seems. First, because augmentation and automation are not necessarily separate. If you augment sufficient people and a company doesn't need to increase their output, then they can do the same with less people. So if you augment, you can still take jobs away. So one doesn't necessarily eliminate the other. And on the PMs, the market has called PMs a lot of different roles. You call them product managers, but the majority of them are actually project managers. They're scrum masters, they're product owners. They're folks that are tasked with ensuring that delivery happens. And a delivery manager is not a product manager. And so we particularly do not replace product managers. The folks that actually have to make the judgment, see if this signal matters, understand their feeling about this customer, getting the product sense to actually decide how to bring this into the overall strategy, is still a place for humans. Not only because we can keep context in a very different way, but because it really is a human labor to understand another human. And so what you want to do when you're a good product manager is really understand your customers. And so those people shouldn't be replaced. The project managers, the scrum masters, the product owners, I do think that those roles are roles that disappear. And if you're a product manager but in title only, and you actually do one of those roles as 80% of your job, watch out and try to learn other skills. Spend more time with customers and less with tickets.
Okay, it takes human to understand another human. Like, it's interesting. It's very interesting. I'm gonna say it out loud, and I feel like that. And I've had so many discussions with so many founders and operators and people. AI makes a lot of mistakes. Like, I mean, the state of AI, I can't trust it. I can't even replace a receptionist, a simple receptionist whose job is to answer calls with AI. Like, there has to be a human involved. So when you're doing, or when you're like taking these signals and giving like a roadmap, how do you make sure that the AI is accurate? Or what's your take about AI's accuracy? It's been 3 years or 4 years since ChatGPT happened. a lot has happened. Probably the dust has also started to settle. But what's
Yeah.
your take on like AI making mistakes or
Yeah.
reliability of AI?
In terms of timeline, it really depends when you start measuring. If you go from Transformers is 2017, we started working with GPT-2 in 2019
Yeah.
for the product that we had with self-following chatbots. So it's changed a lot. And the challenge with all of these technologies, at least since the rise of deep learning, is that they're non-deterministic, which means that when you roll a dice, some of the times it will land on a letter rather than a number, in this case. No? And now a lot of people focus on the failures that it has. No, like, is it important that it cannot say how many R's on a strawberry? No, but at the same time, it is changing completely the theoretical mathematics field. It's resolved more theorems and problems than any other individual in the history of the world. So when we talk about how I didn't recommend the cereal that my kid like, okay, but at the same time, it resolved theorems that you couldn't even understand. So it is a very skewed and jagged, as they say, intelligence, in that it is like a very special person, in that they're magnificent savants in particular areas, and they are dumb as bricks on others. And it's interesting to understand where that fits into a role. The objective of AI is not to replace a person. So when you are thinking about what a secretary does, it is the good secretaries. It's not because they answer the phone and they schedule your meetings in the space that is available. It's because they understand your morning and they know that on Wednesdays, you usually like to wake up a little later because on Tuesday nights you have an event to pitch with other founders. And so it tries to schedule you at 10 if she can instead of 9, even if 9 is the more correct one. It is the person that actually builds a little bit of that relationship with the person at the other side of the phone so that you don't have to do all of that work. And so we don't necessarily need to aim to replace full humans. What we need to do is to make sure that we dedicate our time where we add the most value. So in the case of a secretary, that would be taking the full calls and spending 20 minutes on the phone call when it's an important person for the person that she is working for. And maybe knowing when to actually hand things over to the automatic scheduler. That will just take it off of her hands so that she can spend more time thinking about the gift that you want to get to your biggest client on the birthday of her daughter. And that is actually where we add a difference, to understand really what makes others tick and how to make that tick in the end be synchronized with ours.
Did you work with GPT-1 and GPT-2? Did you have a chance to try them out?
Only two, not GPT-1 in our case. So at the time we used the OpenAI gym extensively, and one of the...
So
Go ahead.
I'm curious, what has changed since GPT-2? Like, was it the same feeling when you were using it back then, or like did everything change in November 2022?
When they a little bit earlier, maybe when they launched 3.5 Instruct, which was the model that really changed the game, and at the beginning it was available on a playground before they put it on ChatGPT. I was just lucky in the end. Our company wasn't using it at the time, but we acquired another company of two young founders that the CTO, and that ended up being the head of data science for our company, for Directly, was one of the first people to write a book around Transformers. He was a professor earlier on Johns Hopkins, and he actually brought Transformers to the company way before. One of their investors in their company was Greg Brockman, the CTO of OpenAI. And so it is because of that we started working with GPT-2, because what we did at the time is that we needed to create a support chatbot for one of our clients, let's say Samsung. So what we do is that we take a lot of sample conversations, and from there we created tasks to give to experts of Samsung, power users, that will actually say what is the right answer, correct some things, and then using GPT-2 generate the final response that was going to be then saved and used in a decision tree that answer questions, right? So it wasn't mind-boggling. We were using a lot of other LLMs before, like BERT, and others that were also, before GPT-2, they were cheaper to run as well. It's just that they completed phrases, they fill gaps, they help you phrase a task or a question, they help you create training data too. But they did not have a conversation. They could only, how they started, basically token prediction So that's what they do. They just fill the blanks on a phrase. That's mainly what they were used for.
Yeah, but do you think now, after post 2022, and then with all the money being spent on AI, have these models magically started to think, or is it just better models with better data using more compute, and nothing has changed since GPT-2 in terms of architecture, or
It really depends on semantics.
Sorry, go
The
ahead.
underlying architecture we know only a little bit because OpenAI, as much as its name is not very open in terms of how they architect their models. Anthropic isn't either. They release model cards and we get an idea of how they're done, but we don't know for sure. So we don't know how much the architecture has changed. Now, because they haven't changed hardware, we can assume that it is pretty much the same, just optimized for the hardware that they're using. Now, of course, the outcome of these models has changed massively. The indexes of intelligence have exploded. This was just, going back to what I was saying earlier, not something that we could have predicted with how the models were working back then. What today we have was unthinkable, not only by us, but even by OpenAI, even by our head of data science, Cyrano Demir. People didn't believe that this was going to be the type of jump. And to your last question, which is like, do they think? That really depends on how you think about what that means. Are they intelligent? Same thing. Now, technically, they reason now because they have basically like a token allocation, as you know, to like do some internal reasoning before they give you the answer. No? And that could be called thinking. Now, are they intelligent souls or something like that? That's a question for others, definitely. It's very philosophical, and I do think it's a little bit mute today until we really get enough evidence that we should give them IDs and passports.
Yeah. Intelligence obviously could be a philosophy. I've been debating with my own self as well. So the other day I was reading a blog from Anthropic, and they were talking about G-space, that models have this G-space where they have a lot of random data that comes into play when a model is thinking or making decisions, and it's pretty much the same as humans do it within their brain. So somehow these models have become intelligent,
but it's by design too. Well, the thing is that we've also designed the architecture of those models to mimic our brain. So it's not a surprise that then it mimics it. In that, what you're saying, it's why they designed it that way. They wanted to mimic as much as possible the understanding of our own human cognition. Deep learning, neural networks, all of that is on the same field. So it's not a surprise per se that they do that, because it's how we're trying to get to have them think for it.
How we're trying to get them to think. This is interesting. Okay, I mean, if we talk, step out of the philosophy of it and talk about business and all, one of the things that we have started to face as we are scaling Founding.dev is the inference cost. I mean, I'm sure you have also come across that. A lot of companies have come across that problem. So recently I've started to think of just moving the whole thing to an open source model. I haven't used Kimi, or I don't act on hype. I act on my research, but I strongly believe that open source models are at par with what we have from Anthropic and OpenAI. So what are your thoughts around that? Do you think they're good enough, or should companies take that direction?
It's not only good enough in the end. It's because when you decide to work over a certain harness, which then uses a set of models, you are doing trade-offs like in any engineering decision, no? And so you probably remember from before the buy versus build decision of any vendor, no?
Yeah.
Now it's similar with the pieces of a stack of your. It depends on what you're saying inference for. Is it inference as part of your product, so a service that you give to other users that passes through an LLM, or is it inference on development, right? So, for example, in your case, it's probably for development, I imagine, no?
Yeah.
The cost of developers using these tools to develop.
Yeah. 100%.
So in that case, it really depends on volume. You need a lot of volume to justify moving to an open source model. Why? Because of the startup costs. So if you want to start using Codex tomorrow, the only thing you have to do is pay $20. And now you can start using Codex, which is a harness on top of a model, on top of their own hardware infrastructure, right? Now, if you want to do that on your own, you need to build a harness or get OpenCode. Then get a model hosted or getting on a third-party hosting provider like Fireworks AI or Together AI or one of those, no? And then, well, they have to get hardware to run that. So in the end, unless you are doing bare metal model loading and upgrades and managing all of the stack, as well as creating the harness that then you interact with like Codex or Claude, you're better off using somebody else's because you're not going to be as good as Claude Code on building a harness or OpenCode. You're not going to be having the volume to justify hosting Kimi until you have like 300 devs working on this day to day.
Okay, I mean, I can spin up. I'm not like an expert here, and please excuse me if I am not saying the right terms, but I can spin up an 800 GPU on AWS and just spin up my own model, and eventually, it will start paying off. However much I'm paying to AWS per month, it will start to pay off. So shouldn't it be the direction from day one versus
It's
waiting
just
for
the
the
thing is that
impact?
there is a misconception. Sorry, realized I have a
Go ahead.
delay. It's a bit of a misconception. You're actually gonna spend more on AWS than you're gonna get back. It is more expensive today to rent the GPUs to run a model if you're not using it to its limit. So if you're not burning the GPU, it's not worth it to get it. You're gonna spend more than you would somewhere else. If you wanna rent enough to run Kimi every month, you're gonna spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just to have it available. And then you're gonna like if you have to manage scaling this when everybody needs it, and if you're one developer, like why would you do that, right? Like you need to have enough volume to justify having that.
Okay,
Otherwise,
so
just
if
renting the GPUs is more expensive.
no, I get it. If it's hundreds and thousands of dollars, and again, I don't have any
Mhm.
idea around this. Like, why is there so much hype around going to open source? It wouldn't make a sense for a company our size to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars per month for.
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. That's why I don't suggest it. I don't suggest that people go for open source models unless, and this is the middle point, you go for a third party that is hosting it for you. But then you're in the same place that you were paying OpenAI. So if you use, for example, OpenCode is the open source version of Claude Code, right? So if you use that, you already have the harness and you can connect to either your URLs or even your local models, no? There you have two options. Either you use small local models for small tasks, and then it's free, basically, whatever you're burning on your own computer, or you're using a model that is hosted on the cloud. If it's hosted on the cloud, it can be your private cloud, in which case you have to manage it, you have to pay for it month to month. That is the expensive part that needs a lot of. Or you can use a third-party service that is like calling OpenAI's API, but actually behind it, it has an open model. The typical ones for this is Grok with a Q, for example, that is one of the cheapest and
Yes.
fastest. Together AI, Fireworks. The thing is that then you're using an API just like if you were using, Opus on Claude. So your stack hasn't changed that much. So the question I think is less so about just open models or not, but how do you build a harness that can run a good amount of your tasks with local models or with cheap models? How do you build all of your system so that it doesn't need a Fable to do good work? So it doesn't need a Kimi, but rather it can run with something much cheaper,
Much cheaper.
Because
That
that
makes
was
sense.
the example that I put was only for Kimi, which is very big.
Yeah, but like, why is there so much hype around open source? Is it because we think that eventually we'll get to a point where we'll be running these models on bare CPUs, an EC2 machine, I spin up a machine like I used to run a server or MySQL, and then be able to serve my customers. Are we moving in that direction, like in terms of optimization?
It's something like that. It's something very similar to that. It's that when open source creates pressure on both private models and the rest of the open source ecosystem, it makes everybody try to inch forward on cost and efficiency. So for example, every time that a new big model like Kimi comes out, in 8 hours, you already have other people that have distilled versions of Kimi that lose like only 1% of performance, but they are a tenth of the cost to run. The next week, you have another one that is 100th of the cost with like 90% of the performance. So the cool thing is, yes, that we're going in that direction, but not so much necessarily just because you can run it locally, but because it makes any company with access to compute able to compete on the price per token game. And so as more competition there is, more do the prices lower.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which is exciting.
Which is exciting. And if we were to map it, like, okay, own your model, that's good. But if we were to map it like to the real world, like for example, we claim that every company will start owning their own SaaS eventually. SaaS will be dead. We talk about it every single day. That's the philosophy of our company. So what's your take overall with AI? Like, is it the direction that the world is going to take? Because you said buy versus build, and that has always been a debate across the board. So what is your thoughts
I had
around
an
that?
article on this. The question has changed, and now I do think it's buy versus build versus buy. And so there is a good amount of things that you can just like buy code for your company, right? There is a lot of internal tooling that you probably wouldn't even have unless you build it for yourself. But thinking that there's going to be no SaaS, I think misses the point that the reason that people use products is not because of the code, as we were starting to say at the beginning. It's not because of the software, but it's because of the product. You may have a very big need, but you may just get a faster horse when somebody else can develop a car for you. And so this is the philosophy of building products. You need to solve a problem even better than a user could themselves, because you're obsessing around that problem, because you know also the problems that user is going to hit as long as they solve their perceived pain. And that is what makes a product. It's not purely the amount of code that you put in, right? Like you could have the most millions of lines that you want, and you could still have zero value. The important thing is that you have understood how the user feels through the process of solving that issue. How and do they get value not only for themselves, but how do they share and get recognition in the company because of having done that work? A lot of things that when you're just trying to build a little utility, you don't realize. And of course, these are the non-obvious ones, because before this, there is maintenance, security, responsibility, governance, and all of the things that actually make a product valuable, right? Like, I don't want to be my own auditor. That needs to be another company, so that if there is a problem with my credentials, actually this is a zero responsibility. That is also why things like insurance and other businesses exist. No, you don't want to be responsible for everything that possibly any of your employees could touch. You have a specialization. You hire people that know around an area, and they may not know how to build a CRM, or they may not know how to actually create an alerting system that works well for DevOps and legal at the same time.
I get that. I think you're absolutely right here. Obviously, you don't have to, and then nobody wants to go through. So one of the biggest pushback we get between for the rent versus build debate is, if we even end up building it, who's going to maintain it? Like, who's going to make sure that the uptime is there and all. However, uh, one thing that at least I have learned along the way is that uh, being able to, I'm not sure if I can say the word, but being able to democratize the software, like make it a democracy around software, that I will only use the software that I need, and I won't pay for the features that, like, I don't need. So that is something that
That's actually
I
very
find very
interesting.
exciting, very interesting about AI, that you have that power to
Like more products may
make those decisions.
become headless.
Exactly. So that is very interesting to me, at least, while on this journey. uh,
We see a lot of that in agentic scenarios, like, for example, things that your agent could consume for you. Apollo has recently released their CLI, for lead
yeah.
generation.
Oh, I did not
It's
know that.
already a system that works credit based, of course. Oh yeah, Tyler announced it not too long ago, and it's interesting because they actually say that most people are not using it yet. And my thinking is that the ICP, the typical client, is not the one that is most AI piled and working directly natively out of Claude Code or whatever. But it will come, and that is the direction that we're going. I agree to, where products will be much more of a service in that sense than
Exactly.
something that you live on, that a surface that you're like clicking around every day.
Yeah, no, I agree to that. Okay, I think, George, final question, because we're almost on time. So last night I met with an old friend. He works at works at IBM. So he said that like we're selling a lot of software to a lot of companies, but ultimately a lot of the AI that we're selling is not being used. Like the demos are great, but the companies are not finding a lot of value. And then this, we have also started to come across a lot of scenarios where we can give them the best service or the best product, but still the companies cannot get ROI out of this AI. And you've built in this space for a very long time. What do you think are the companies doing wrong, or is it just like, do you think, no, that's not correct, companies are getting a lot of ROI out of AI? But at least in my personal experience, I haven't seen a lot of ROI apart from writing code. Like writing code, that's a solved problem. Like, it helps your engineering team and all. But apart from that, like for example, in your case, product management, it's hard to like calculate that ROI, and companies are not able to use AI as they should. Like that's what the perception is. What are your thoughts around that?
So I would divide that into, but the main failure that I see, and this happens either when they do it internally or when somebody is building a service or a product for somebody else. The biggest problem is misunderstanding the tool for the product. The problem is when people ask themselves that same question, like, how do I sell AI? How do I know the value of AI? AI is like saying, how do I know the ROI of the internet? How do I know the ROI of using a computer? It's quite difficult because it's just pervasive, and it is something that permeates the full suite of whatever you do today. If you're working towards that optimization, I would say that, for example, on our case, it is affected every aspect of the business, from the way that we interact with customers to the ways that we do invoicing and billing, to obviously the way that we write code, which of course I agree with you is the most impacted area. But the biggest problem is when executives, when sellers come with the idea that they have to sell AI, and that what they're bringing to a company is AI. Like, what is that? I'm giving you access to the internet. Are you a service provider? No, it's a product. It gives you AI for sales. Okay, but what is the value? Oh, it increases your revenue. Yes, but how do you bring that down to actually a pyramid of metrics that you can draw from, like increase engagement to repeated sales? That is what you should be selling. That's what matters. Like, what is the value of a given product? Not so much the value of AI. We know that AI is valuable. It really depends on how it's used. The thing is that if you focus too much on the tooling, you're not really looking at the operating model. You're not looking at the overall value. And particularly, too many people try to put AI when they shouldn't. You need to really understand that AI, as we were saying at the beginning, to close this out, is non-deterministic. So you need to be very careful about how do you create the most trustable flow whenever you're automating anything. And that means using LLMs the least possible. You need to design a system where you use maybe traditional techniques like classifiers, routers, and avoid using LLMs unless you need such a variable joint in the ETL, in the pipeline. The idea is not just to fit LLMs wherever they can. And that is usually what creates that feeling. Because when people just put a chatbot for putting a chatbot, they just put an LLM because the company said that they needed to use AI. That is destined to fail. You need to start from the problem that you want to solve. And if AI is the right tool, then do it. But don't just take a hammer and look for a nail.
Yeah, I mean, take a hammer, look for the nail. I think, I think you got it. I can't explain it better. But personally, I'm more bullish towards single people using AI, and I'm more bullish on one-person company, one-person $1 million companies, one-person $10 million companies, and then they using AI. I'm very bullish on that. Like, I'm an engineer. All my life I've been an engineer, but AI is giving me possibilities to be a salesperson as well. It has given me possibilities to be a designer, a content writer, an accountant, a tax accountant, anything I want to be. So that is something that makes me super, super excited about this.
I would just to draw this for the audience on numbers. A year and a bit ago, on May 2025, we're the two founders of the company are engineers. I write, at the time at least, less code than my CTO, and he's better, of course, more of a data scientist. We had about 15, 20 PRs in the month to production, right? So 20 merges. In May of this year, we had 456. So about 20 something times. In July,
That's
we had
huge.
656. In
Huge.
June, sorry, in July, we've crossed 1,000 between two people.
Wow. Wow.
And
Wow.
right now, the average is
Wow.
one PR every what, like 25 minutes? It's absurd. It's absurd.
It's absurd.
And
It's
this is
absurd.
because you need to invest on that, on the skills, on the harness, and the things that are repeatable. But it is
Yeah.
absurd the multiplication of your own capabilities that you can do,
No, I
particularly
get that.
as an engineer. Even if you don't
No.
write the code, understanding a bit, gives you wings.
Okay. I think final thoughts, and again, this is just my personal opinion. You can do it because you're a small team. You're not a bloated team. If you were a bigger company, the effects would not be that apparent, in my opinion. And then obviously, I'm learning by the day. So, but I strongly think that AI is probably benefiting more the smaller companies versus the larger ones. So,
And that's exactly why we exist. Because what we do is give that traceability so that everybody in the team can move in at this
exactly,
speed and not fighting each
exactly,
other, but rather
exactly, exactly.
everybody rowing in the same direction. Which is
Yeah,
why we decided to work with enterprises, because they were the ones that were not going to be able to benefit from this unless they have
exactly,
a good
exactly,
observable system to help them out.
exactly. Yeah. Well, this has been fun. Thank you, George, for joining us. And for our audience, whoever is listening to us, we discuss these amazing things every week. So feel free to subscribe to Unhinged AI. That's the name of our podcast. And feel free to check out Zentrik as well. I think what George and the team is doing is amazing, and I would also want to try it out. So thank you, George, for joining us.
All right, talk soon.
Bye.